I'm going to get going. Brilliant. Fantastic. Good morning. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this first webinar in our series focused on the urban ecosystem restoration targets. My name is Heather Brooks. I'm policy advisor at Eurocities, and I'm joined today by Leon Kapatis, who is lead for programs and climate resilient for Resilient Cities Network, and he's going to support with some of your questions later on. So a couple of house rules before we get started. I'll just ask you to keep your microphone muted. You'll notice that you're all muted already. But please keep this muted while you're not talking. Just to say, we are going to use Slido throughout, just a couple of points in the webinar today. So you can already get that open maybe on your phone and your computer. You can see that there's a QR code there. You can also go directly to slido.com and use the hashtag nature restoration law. So you can get that open ready for in a moment. Just to say, this webinar will be recorded, and we're going to share the recording along with the presentations to all of the participants. We're going to use the chat box to gather your questions. And if you need to, you can raise your hand. So we'll have several moments throughout the webinar today to take your questions. As I say, please do note those down in the chat box as we go. And then if you need to, you can raise your hand as well, and we'll give you the floor. Okay, so today we are going to explore the starting point for the urban nature restoration targets. We're going to cover three key points, three key questions. First of all, we're going to cover what are the definitions to be aware of. So looking at green space, tree canopy cover, looking at local administrative unit, what does the urban centre, urban cluster mean, the peri-urban area. So we're going to hear from Benjamin Rolfs, who's joining us from the European Commission. Secondly, we're going to hear and discuss a bit about the data. So what satellite data is there? What kind of local level data can you use then to supplement this satellite data? And what are some of the things to consider there? So joining us today, we'll have Grazia Zulian, external consultant at the Joint Research Centre. And then we're going to hear from that local context with Anne Franklin joining us from the Brussels Capital Region to share some insights into the data-related challenges of implementing this Article 8 on the urban nature restoration. Finally, then, we're going to focus a bit more on some higher resolution data. So we have Liv Tunen, technology project lead at Space for Good, who's going to talk to us a bit about what some of this higher resolution imaging can offer. And then we have Mette Pont, who's Professor of Urban Morphology and Urban Design at Chalmers University of Technology in Gothenburg, who's going to talk to us about some of the possibilities of using satellite data to map species habitat connectivity. So some really interesting presentations coming up. This is your chance as participants then to share some of your questions and some of your challenges. You know, you can see we've got quite a few different experts here, so this is really your chance to pose some of those questions that you have now in terms of how we move forward with those urban nature restoration targets. We will take a break at some point today. So after we've heard from Anne Franklin, so from Perspective Brussels, around that local context, we're going to take about a 5-minute break just to stretch our legs, grab a coffee before we come back. Okay, so before we get started, we'd like to hear from you, and we'd like to see who is in our virtual room. This is a public webinar, so we have quite a few different people joining from different contexts. So let's hear from you. I'll ask you to then connect, please, to Slido. You can see the QR code on the screen. You can either just use that on your phone or connect with the hashtag NRL, hashtag Nature Restoration Law. So let's see who's in our virtual room. I ask you then, what organisation do you work for? I'm actually just going to ask you to, I realize now that it's not integrated into this PowerPoint. I'm actually just going to ask you if you can write that down in the chat box. Pop down in the chat box, who do you work for as an organization? Are you joining us as a city? Are you joining us from a university? Are you a member state? Okay, so I can see we have Mannheim, Utrecht, Helsinki, Milan, Roads and Traffic Agency of Flanders. Okay, we've got quite a lot of cities here. The European Knowledge Network, European Landscape Contractors Association. Okay, Ireland Department of Planning, National Government Netherlands. Yeah, okay. And City of Lleida in Spain. Fantastic. So we've got a real spread of people here joining us today. Okay, that's fantastic to see. Welcome, everyone. All right, continue popping down your organization. It's great to see virtually who's here joining us today. What is it we are focusing on today? Just as a brief reminder, because I think most people are probably already aware, but what are those nature restoration law targets? So, as a reminder, within the nature restoration law, member states shall ensure that there is no net loss in the total national area of urban green space and urban tree canopy cover in urban ecosystem areas compared to 2024. So this is Article 8 of the nature restoration law. Then, post 2030, member states shall achieve an increasing trend in the total national area of urban green space, including through the integration of urban green space into buildings and infrastructure in the urban ecosystem areas until a satisfactory level is reached. And this is the same for tree canopy cover. So no net loss by 2030, and then an increasing trend for urban green space and tree canopy cover after 2030 until a satisfactory level is reached. That satisfactory level is to be determined by member states and the Commission. We're not going to touch upon that today. We're going to focus on the definitions and the data that can be used. But just so we know what it is we're talking about. Okay. Now, seeing that there are a lot of cities joining us today in our virtual room, I've got another question for you, and I'll ask you again to write down the response in the chat box. Do you think you are more likely to use the local administrative unit or the urban centre urban cluster as the boundary for the urban nature restoration targets in your city or your country? So based on your current understanding, based on what you know already, and we'll talk about the definitions in a moment, but based on what you already know, do you think you're more likely to use the LAU or the urban centre urban cluster, so this idea of density, as the boundary for setting your urban restoration targets? It'll just be good for us to have a quick overview. If you don't know, no problem. You can also write down don't know in the chat box. Okay, I can see we've got a couple of LAUs, a couple of urban centre urban cluster and peri-urban zone. A couple of to be decided, undecided, not sure yet. A hope for urban centres, because that's where green space is needed the most. Yeah, okay. A couple of not sure yet, and a couple more urban centre urban clusters. Okay, it's really interesting to see what you're already thinking from your side for this. So we will kick off then with the definition. So what does it mean then, this local administrative unit, the urban centre urban cluster, the urban ecosystem area? So we're going to kick off with this first topic of definitions. And we have joining us then Benjamin Rolls from the Commission. Hello, Ben. Hello, hello. Just make sure, can you unmute yourself? I just want to make sure we can hear you. It worked 2 seconds ago.
Now?
Voila. Perfect.
Okay, good.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Ben. Hello.
Hi.
All right. So first of all, maybe just to ask you, are you surprised by seeing some of those responses in the chat box?
Yeah, no, I'm very pleased that people know enough about it to give an answer. I thought there would be more don't know, but there's undecided and not sure yet, and other. So people are thinking about it, and they know they've read the articles, so that's good. Yeah.
Great.
Well,
All
probably
right,
the don't
fantastic.
knows haven't responded. I mean, I'm really amazed at how we've got 217 people here, so that's great.
There's a lot of interest in this for sure. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to look at these definitions, green space, etc. But let's start off with an overview of the timeline for implementation. What dates do cities and member states need to be aware of?
Okay, I'm going to take control of the presentation. Well,
Great.
I'm actually going to go back just a couple of slides to this one because it's not quite true.
Okay,
So
perfect.
the member states shall achieve increasing trend in the total national area of green space after 2030, but for tree canopy cover, it's not the total national area, it's the area per urban ecosystem area. So after 2030, you can't, every single individual urban ecosystem area has to then manage this for tree canopy cover themselves. And I think it's worth saying that this increasing trend does imply that there can't be a decreasing trend. So the in effect, there will be a continuation of no net loss after 2030, and there are no exemptions after 2030. So I think that's the first thing I wanted to I wanted to say. Okay, so now going back to the first slide. Yeah, well, the other thing is, I think it's worth just saying there's so many people here. You're going to have lots of questions, and I just want to introduce myself. I'm Ben Rolls. I work for the European Commission in the Environment Department, and I was involved in the drafting and negotiation of this regulation. But it's worth saying that it's not just the Commission who do the drafting. It's then the Council and the Parliament. So it's all three institutions negotiate, work together. They come up with the trilogue. There were lots of things which were really controversial, which were very much discussed. There were things quite often added at the last minute. And the nature of EU regulation has always been like this, that it's a joint enterprise, but then the Commission have to implement it. And often that implementation does require quite a lot of people sort of trying to work out, okay, how exactly do we have to do this? We get the broad overview, but what does this exactly mean? What does this mean? There's a lot of toing and froing. Sometimes, I mean, in the case of Birds and Habitats Directive and other urban wastewater and other things, it can take some time, and actually sometimes some court cases and sometimes, legal opinions before it's completely settled exactly how a regulation is going to be implemented and exactly what happens. So I just want, I'm not washing my hands of responsibility, but I do want you to know that we are at the early stages of implementation. I'm not going to have all the answers absolutely here immediately. I think one of the great benefits of this meeting is that we can talk to each other. You can share your experiences. I mean, it's super interesting that some are using LAU, some are using urban centre and urban cluster. Hopefully we're going to have a little chance to talk about what those different options mean, what the pros and cons are. Yeah, so that's just by way of introduction. I thought it's quite important, I think, to say that. So although you're going to have lots of questions, don't absolutely expect all the answers right now. Okay, on the timeline. Well, actually, and this is a bit strange, I suppose, in some ways, when you look at the timeline, because the regulation is already in force. And as of August last year, I think it was the 18th, the regulation came into force. It has to be legally applied already. So I guess, but of course, at the same time, member states haven't submitted their national restoration plans yet. And that's in August next year. And those drafts will actually set out exactly how member states are going to implement the nature restoration regulation. And in terms of the urban aspects of the regulation, that will all be set out and final sort of sent to the Commission and the European Environment Agency in 2026, and that's when we'll assess that that everything sounds right and everything's good. So you might be, as a city, scratching your head and saying, well, what do we do now? And how do we, if we don't know exactly, it might be almost a couple of years until it's completely finalized what our management area is. We don't know exactly whether we're going to be exempt or not, what the targets are. I mean, all I can say is basically you should start. I mean, you can find out. Probably you have a pretty good idea of where your green spaces and tree canopy cover is already. And I guess you need to bear in mind with any new planning that this will be set. There will be a baseline set from last year. And you may well have to not be below that baseline by 2030. So if you do dip down, if you lose some green space and tree cover now, depending on how your member state manages it, you may have to increase it again to be back in legal compliance by 2030. Now, of course, there's two things to remember. One is that you might be exempt if you've got over a certain tree canopy cover and green space. Do not assume you are yet. That would be my other recommendation, because there's still lots of discussions about how green space and tree canopy cover are going to be measured. And these are all decisions, and this is totally really important. These are all decisions that will be made by your member state. So regulations it's in force, but it is implemented by member state. So lots of the decision points will be made by member states in this process. It's not for the Commission says this is how it's supposed to be. This is the interpretation of the regulation. If member states don't do it, we can sue member states. We can take member states to court, but we can't take individual cities to court. It's up for member states to do. It's a bit like the air pollution legislation as well. Same sort of thing. Okay, so sorry, that's August 2026 national restoration plans come in. That will include all the decisions on urban ecosystem areas, green space exemptions, etc. And we'll talk more about why that might be. There may be options, in the future on that later. And actually, the Commission then, we assess these restoration plans by January 2027, and actually it's only in August 2027 that the final restoration plans are in place. But I think you can, for all practical purposes, I think you can assume from the urban perspective that August 2026 is going to be a pretty important deadline point.
Well, and as you said, is the regulation came into force in August last year already. So even now we should be seeing no loss, ideally.
Well, it's no net loss between 2024 and 2030. I mean, you could have a loss, but then you're going to have to build it back up again.
Right.
So, I mean, the regulation measures again. I mean, I think logically, the easiest way to implement this regulation is probably to put in place some sort of management program at local, regional, or national level, which automatically means that there's no net loss, that the planning is done such that there's compensation, etc. But it's not up to me how this is implemented, and different member states already, we can see they do this in very, very different ways. And in some member states they already have something basically already like this, and sometimes it's on the individual developer. Any new development has to have a zero loss overall, and they have to compensate, or they have to put green roofs and things on. In other cases, compensation's allowed. In other cases not. In other cases they manage regionally a compensation scheme, so they basically have an area of grey brownfield site or grey area, and they're paying and restoring that area and making new green space, and that offsets any other developments. So it's very different how it's done in different places.
Sure. We're going to come into some of those examples, I think even actually in the next webinar. So you've also mentioned there this uniform format of the national restoration plans, and you're touching upon some of this need actually for collaboration between the local, regional and national level. We are going to come to that in the second webinar, so we'll delve a bit further into that. But maybe just to finalize then on some of the timeline, and we can move on to the definitions then to start with this. Yeah, okay, so all right, so by August 2027, we'll have the finalized version of the National Restoration Plan implemented in member states.
Yeah.
All right, so moving on maybe to what's actually going to be monitored.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to say.
Yeah.
I didn't mention the uniform format. So the basis of the National Restoration Plans is a template, which we have now drafted and agreed with a committee of member states. It hasn't been finally adopted by the Commission yet, so I don't think it's yet. That is a step that needs to be, there's a final step that needs to be done. But essentially we have this big template for the whole nature restoration law with 2 sections for the urban targets, which essentially just reflect the regulation in terms of the logic of them. So we're in there, member states have to say what your urban ecosystem areas are, what sort of are you using additional measurements of green space and tree canopy cover, etc. So, but I'll talk about, I will be presenting some of the parts from the template during this talk.
Yeah, great. Okay, so indeed, maybe then we can have a quick look at some of the definitions for green space and tree canopy cover. What definitions do we need to be aware of?
Okay, yes, sorry, I have to, someone just came into the room. I have to change the slide myself. So measuring green space and tree canopy cover. Okay, so here we're just talking about the definitions. Essentially, the regulation says that you need to use Copernicus data. It should be, your green space and tree canopy cover should be based on Copernicus data. And it gives a list of the land cover types which have to be included as the definition of green space. Now, I think it's really important to remember and to realize that this is about land cover. It's not about land use. So it's not about classification of land. Your land may be classified as grey space, but if it's covered in green, it's covered by this regulation. The regulation does not distinguish between private and public land. It doesn't say if it's a play park or a military installation or your back garden. It's just looking at green space, because we're looking at the, I mean, this is a nature restoration law. It comes from the basis of the regulation is about nature and biodiversity, and then it's for climate change adaptation and mitigation. Obviously, the other benefits of green space and tree canopy cover in terms of ecosystem services is recreation, air pollution reduction, stormwater runoff, things like that. It's not all about climate change, but fundamentally, I just want you to realize it's public and private land, and it is land cover type. So if you've got a bush somewhere or a green, permanently green vegetated area, that's going to be covered by this regulation in terms of the baseline setting. What isn't included would be arable land. So if you have something which is not permanent grassland or permanently vegetated, so it's ploughed and so it's arable land, that's not included. Okay. Now then we've got this issue of what years, you know, when is the baseline data obviously is as 2024, but we go as close to 2024 as we can, and that will eventually be the final data that's used in the 2026 submission by the member states. So at the moment, the best Copernicus urban green space data we have is 2021, but it comes every 2 years. So we will have 2023 data available. That will be published in Q2 this year. So that will be the final data set for this. For tree canopy cover, we actually have it every year. So there should eventually be 2024 data available, and it's estimated that that will be available at the end of this year, beginning of next year. So you might be saying, well, what do we do until then? But in fact, what we can do, I shouldn't have the chat on because there's all these interesting questions coming in, and I want to answer them. But we'll do that later. How much time do we have actually, Heather?
Yeah, we've got about another 5-10 minutes for this.
Oh,
yeah,
oh,
but indeed, those questions are very, very interesting. Some of them are linked to some further presentations that we'll be coming to, and the exclusions, etc. Ben will present that in a second. So we will come to most of those points in the chat box that you put down.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll move on. This is the basic data which we're expecting to use. I should say, if you this data is publicly available, but also the Commission can, for member states, provide this data. So if you choose the whole LAU, or if we know what your urban ecosystem area is, then it's not actually impossible for us to just calculate how much green space and tree cover you have according to these. But you might want to use additional data, and that's something we'll talk about in the 5-10 minutes that we have. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the local administrative units. No?
Can I just take you back just to do a quick clarification? There are a lot of numbers there. So for the draft national restoration plans that are due August 2026, we've got 2023 for the baseline year for urban green space, and 2024 for the baseline for urban tree canopy cover.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Great.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes. Now, until then, you might use the latest available version, assuming it won't have changed dramatically for urban green space 2021. But you can see when the next ones are available. So 2023, the final green space data will be available very soon, and the tree canopy cover data is going to be trickling in during the remainder of this year, because they've changed how they process and collect that data. So we're suddenly getting it much quicker, luckily, because you'll see we're in 2024 and the data we're in 2025 and we've only got 2018, but we're actually going to get 2024 data potentially at the end of this year. So that's great.
Fantastic. Okay, so yeah, you're about to move on to local administrative unit, urban centre, urban cluster.
Yeah. Okay, well, it seems that a lot of people know a bit about this already. So the local administrative unit is agreed with Eurostat, between member states, statistical offices, and Eurostat each year. It is essentially an administrative boundary, but it's established by the member state. So it's not really something the Commission has control over. It's agreed between member state and Eurostat. It comes out every year. The 2023 data is available. So what is your LAU boundary, and are you a city, a town and suburb, or rural? That comes every year, and those should be available for 2024 during the course of this year. They don't change dramatically much, but there are some boundary changes in some member states sometimes, and sometimes there's a classification change. Now, historically, these have only been used for statistical purposes, and now there's a law which links to whether you're a city or a town and suburb. So maybe this is needs to be taken more seriously, but there is a process and a definition which is gone through, and essentially Eurostat work with member states to get that right. Urban centres and urban clusters is also managed according to regulation by Eurostat. It's not something that you look at the definition of urban centres and urban clusters and then you work out where your urban centres and urban clusters are. No, that's not what happens. Every 10 years there is a new urban centre and urban cluster data set produced based on the census. The census is every 10 years, so there was one in 2011, one in 2021. That data is available. It's established and set by Eurostat according to some specific calculations, and that is the final data set that has to be used for nature restoration regulation implementation.
Okay, that's great. This is really clear. And indeed, I can see the questions in the chat about sharing the slides. We will share the slides afterwards. You can see also that Ben's included the links to access this information there embedded within the slide.
I don't know if they are, but
okay, if
on the
not, then we'll
final
get you to
slide,
share them.
I think I may have cut and pasted a photo in rather, but I think some of these links do work actually. On the final slide that I have, I've got some references, and you see this portal on there. The tables with all the links do appear. So this portal for reference documents for the regulation are hosted on this EEA site. I put that up
Okay,
a
fantastic.
few days ago.
Thanks, thanks a lot, Ben. Can I ask then? So the nature restoration law mentions this option for aggregated no net loss
Yes.
at the national level. So what does this mean?
So you mean aggregating LAUs?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, basically, you have some cities like the one I live in Brussels, which is 19 communes, which those are local administrative areas, but they also have a collective single administrative unit of Brussels city capital. Paris would be the same. And so in that case, a member state can combine all their urban ecosystem areas. It could be LAUs, it could be that they combine the LAUs and then they work out their urban ecosystem area within that to make a single unit, and then they manage it as a city, and that could be exempt or not, obviously. Yeah, but the aim and the point of this was to allow metropolitan areas or cities where the LAUs were smaller to work together. So yeah,
Great.
that's the aim and purpose. And I should remind, well, if there are any member states here, I mean, the implementation of one of these regulations is that you have to implement it in the spirit of the law in which the law was decided. So why it's in the whereas of the regulation, why something is written. And this was actually proposed, I think, it may have been by Belgium for Brussels as a specific example, and then we agreed it in the text. So yeah.
Okay. And maybe there is no response to this yet, but what about changing the boundary for the implementation? So what about changing between LAU and using urban centre cluster in the future in like an updated version of the National Restoration Plan? Is that possible?
It's not. I mean, it's not implied by the regulation, in that the regulation says member states will delineate their urban ecosystem areas. But there is in 2031 or 2030, there is a review of the national restoration plans. So I guess if there's a good reason to do it, boundaries have changed, areas have changed, it's not something isn't working, then I guess there is an opportunity to potentially change your system at that point. But from 2024 to 2030, no, that's fixed. And in fact, once your urban ecosystem areas are set in 2024, then I don't think they're going to change before 2030.
Brilliant. So we'll try and stick with the boundaries that are put together now. Okay, so you mentioned a second ago, we're going to move to see some of this kind of in practice in a second. You mentioned a second ago this idea of aggregated LAUs. We're actually going to hear from Brussels Capital Region in a moment around how that has an impact on the ground and what that means in terms of looking at the local level data and the implications for this Article 8. Okay, so I'll keep you on hold for a second, Ben, because we're going to come back to you for some questions, I'm sure, in a moment. I want to ask you to respond maybe to some of the questions in the chat box afterwards. But first of all, we're going to move then to hear from Grazia, and we're going to look at some of the EU satellite data. So what does this mean in practice in terms of mapping? So either with your LAU or your urban centre urban cluster. What does that mean when we move to look at some of the EU satellite data? So I'm going to let you take control first of all, Grazia, and move to your slides. Thank you very much. And
I think I have control.
Can you move the slide?
Sorry?
Can you try moving the slides?
Yes. Yes.
Perfect. Yeah, it does
Okay.
work. Yeah, fantastic. Okay. Okay, then I'll get you to move to your presentation then, please. I say, so this is Grazia, external consultant for the Joint Research Centre. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
So you're going to talk to us and look at a bit at the local territorial typologies. So that's the degree of urbanisation, urban centre, urban cluster, and see some of this EU satellite data. So the Korean land plus cover data set and the tree canopy cover. So what's the first step then, Grazia?
Okay, so what I'm going to do now is to complement Ben's presentation with some examples. I prepared this presentation mostly for people that are not familiar with spatial data. Sometimes we understand the definitions, but if we are not used to geographic data sets, it seems a little bit weird to understand what is requested. So those that are already familiar with will excuse if I will keep things simple. Basically, we have three territorial typologies that we are going to use to define the urban ecosystem area. The typologies are fully described by this very useful report or manual that was published a few years ago by Eurostat. And there you will really find all the, not only the definitions, but also the methodologies that are used to create all the territorial typologies that are in use at European level. So not only the local typologies, which are our focus today, but also NUTS and other typologies like the functional urban areas that creates a sort of integrated system to report statistical data. And I think this is very important to be understood. In any case, we have three main building blocks that we can use to define the urban ecosystem area, and as we already knew. So we have the lower administrative units, the degree of urbanization classification, and the urban centers and urban clusters. What happens here is that the lower administrative units are basically a vector layer. The degree of urbanization classification is a table data set that we connect with link to the polygons to define the type of level of urbanization of a certain area. So if it is classified as cities, town and suburb, or rural settlement. And then we have urban centers and clusters that are basically grid cells classified again, considering the population density and the adjacencies between highly or less highly populated cells. So, wait, that I need to understand. So in basically, each member state have a low-level administrative division. One thing that is very important to consider is that the meaning of LAU is not the same across all member states. So in the manual for territorial typologies, page, let me see, 22, you have the list of definitions that for each member state the LAU have. So they are municipality in Italy, but they are, for instance, in the UK wards, or in Portugal, something in the middle between municipalities and even lower administrative units. In Malta, they are localities, etc., etc. Now, I'm not making the whole list. And this is very important to be understood, because this is crucial when a member state have to decide if it wants or not to aggregate certain areas. So sometimes the aggregation is not needed only because of a metropolitan area, but also because of the nature of the LAU in that member state. Okay, so we have our LAU, and then we have the urban centers and clusters. And you see already from these slides the difference between the two types of data sets. Here we have raster grid of 1 kilometer resolution, and here you have a vector data set that can be rasterized at 100 meters resolution according to the scale of this data set. Okay, so another important aspect is that we do not, with the nature restoration regulation, we do not cover all LAUs. We cover only what is defined by the degree of urbanization as cities, so the red, and towns and suburbs. So we exclude what we classify as rural areas or rural settlements. Now, of course, the terminology is always complicates our life. This classification is based specifically on population density and adjacencies between populated cells. So, of course, we have to accept certain level of generalization. In any case, what happens is that, yes, we download our LAU, and then we have to download a table that again is managed by ESTAT or GISCO, which is one service of ESTAT, and where we have this DEG URBA column. So we will connect the code of the LAU with the code of our boundary, and we will classify our LAU using the degree of urbanization. And for the nature restoration regulation, we will extract only category 1 and 2. This is the first starting point. Whatever is the definition of urban ecosystem area we want to use. So now I will show I made this exercise a few months ago when the degree of urbanization 2021 was not available, but even better because this is only a demonstrative exercise. So you really don't look at the colors, just try to follow the rationale of the exercise. So what happens is that if a member state wants or decides to use the first option in the definition of the urban ecosystem area, it will select only the degree of urbanization code 1, cities, and 2, towns and suburbs, and this will be the total urban ecosystem areas. If Belgium decides to do that, 54% of the country surface will be covered and 62% of the LAU. The job is done, and it can step to the next part of the reporting. So in this case, there's no really need to send data because it will be very easy to define the urban ecosystem area automatically. We simply have to extract for Belgium the LAU code 1 and 2. So the table to be provided for in the template. So there is a specific request in the template to provide the data for the urban ecosystem area. In this case, it's very simple. Into brackets, the numbers that you see here in the where I wrote the title are the same numbers that are reported in the template for the national restoration plans. Just okay. In any case, another option for the selection of urban ecosystem areas, so option B, is that the member state decides to use only one part of the city or of the towns and suburbs. So we always keep the LAU. The LAU is used every time. We extract cities, towns, and suburbs, and we decide to concentrate our efforts only where we have the cells of urban centers and clusters. So if the LAU is highly urbanized, you basically will cover the whole LAU. If the LAU is not totally highly urbanized, you may have a limited space covered. Okay, here I computed the percentage of urban centers and clusters per LAU in Brussels, for instance. But this was an exercise that I did because I like to play with data. It's not required. But it's important, I guess, to make the decision also to do this type of analysis to see what is the pattern of your area or area of interest. Okay, so this is option 2. What we didn't mention so far is that the decision, the member state can also decide to include what we call peri-urban area. So you can decide to include an area that is adjacent to the urban centers and cluster and includes at least 1 kilometer measured from the boundary of urban centers and cluster. Again, this is simply a GIS exercise. You can also have this additional peri-urban area. Okay, so another option, as we said, is to aggregate the LAU. Here, I made the example of Brussels just because it was there. So absolutely, for me, it was an easy exercise to do. I could have done it everywhere, in Lisbon, in Athens, or whatever. But this is simply to show you graphically and spatially what aggregation means. So we had 18 LAU. We collapse the 18 LAU. So in GIS terminology, we dissolve the 19 LAUs or polygons into one polygon. What is very important here is that practically when we dissolve polygons, so we had the 19 polygons, the new data set will have only one row for the big polygon created from the 19. What do we need to create in this case when we report to the Commission is an additional table that will keep the original ID, and we call it GISCO ID because this is the official name GISCO gives to the univocal identifier for each LAU. Okay, so we have our 19 LAUs that we dissolved in one, but we need to create an additional code for the one that we have aggregated. And this has to be done for all the aggregations that the member state decides to make. This is very important for the Commission to check, to revise the nature restoration plans and monitor the progresses declared by the member state. So to make life easy, you simply use your LAU, and that's it makes the life easy for everybody. If you wanted to use all the options that are provided for the definition of the urban ecosystem area, you know that you have to provide additional information for the Commission to follow your process. Okay, so last few slides. There are two data sets that at the European level are produced for urban green space and urban tree canopy cover. These datasets are managed by the European Environmental Agency. One of them is Corinne Plus Backbone. It's a raster map, 10 meters resolution. And it has, let me check if yes, I did it. I did it correctly. So if you see, when you have the brackets in my presentation, that means that this definition is provided in the regulation. So this is the definition of urban green spaces provided in the regulation. If you count and list the land types or land cover types that are mentioned here, they are the same that you find in Corinne Plus Backbone. Okay, so here you download the dataset, you extract only the categories that are mentioned in the regulation, and you calculate your extent. This is an extent. So the percentage and the square kilometers of green space per LAU, and then you calculate the coverage at member state level. Same thing for, no, sorry. One thing to be mentioned is that in April 11, there will be a webinar. So you can attend the webinar, and in 1 hour they will explain you everything about the Corinne Plus. Same thing for the tree canopy cover density. So this is a data set that is managed by the European Environmental Agency, is part of the Copernicus Land Monitoring Service. This data set is not, it provides already the percentage of tree cover density per pixel. The size is again 10 meters resolution. And here with a zonal statistic, you can extract your percentage per LAU. One last thing I would like to add, we consider land cover. So as Ben said, we do not look in the regulation on private or public green. But in any case, I think it's important to underline that all urban green provide ecosystem services, regulating services and cultural ecosystem services. Also, the exposure to green is an important cultural ecosystem service. Not only the accessibility to public, we can discuss hours about that. This is not the point now, but it's important to know that if we live in a neighborhood that is very green, even if we cannot access, we are exposed to a better environment. It's true that many characteristics of the urban green are important for regulating services, the type of green, the distribution, the fragmentation, etc., etc. But as I learned from Ben, this regulation is a catalyst for something more that come later. So there are many other characteristics that we could measure, but I think that also starting to measure the extent, it is an important starting point. Also for more ecosystem services in cities. So I finished. If you have questions, I am here.
Thank you so much, Grazia. Really, really helpful, detailed overview there and clear. I think we might touch a bit more upon this point of land cover instead of land use in a moment. So I'm going to take some questions first of all, and I'll ask Leon in a second to see if there are any questions coming from the chat box. But first of all, I just want to go back to this question around the exclusion. So we've talked a lot about LAUs, about the definition of the boundaries, the local administrative unit, or using urban centre, urban cluster. But what about the exclusion within the regulation? Ben, maybe you can say something about that and just tell us what the rule says.
Sorry, can you repeat the question? I was just answering chat questions.
Sorry, yeah, certainly.
Sorry.
I'm taking control of the slides. We're just going to go back to the question around exclusion. So I know you had a slide on this. I'm just going to take us to that. What does the regulation say about the exclusion?
Oh, right. Okay. Yes. So basically, you have an ecosystem area. So that's been defined by your member state. But the exclusion only looks at the urban centres and urban clusters within the urban ecosystem area. So the urban ecosystem area could be the whole LAU. It could just be the urban centres and urban clusters, or it could be some other part of the LAU, but it has to include at least the urban centres and urban clusters. Now, the urban centres and urban clusters, the exclusion just looks at if in the urban centres and urban clusters of your urban ecosystem area, if it exceeds 45% green green space and 10% tree canopy cover, then a member state may exclude. Some member states may well decide just not to have this option and just say everyone's in.
Okay.
And because of course, sorry.
No, go on.
Well, because member states are looking at this no net loss nationally. So they may have some very some cities which are finding it very, they're very green and they've got lots of tree cover, but they're not going to decrease that either over time. It might even increase because they've got some plan in place, so they're very effective. So member states might want to not exclude their these ones, because then they can help combine to increase the national total, so that other cities which are growing, I don't know, some member states might manage this nationally, others might put the onus on each individual LAU to solve the problem. So,
and you mentioned before maybe that the exclusion applies only up until 2030, right? And then post 2030.
Post 2030, there's no this exclusion is not, it doesn't apply. No,
because
everyone
you've got the increase in trend.
After 2030, everyone's in.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I understand the Commission has a list then of the LAUs that would be impacted. kind of taken into account this exclusion. Is that right, that you've kind of put together this list of LAUs and you've communicated that with member states already?
Not yet. No, what we've actually looked at, we've done some estimates of which LAUs would be excluded or not, but then we want to get the very latest data sets before we can finalize that list.
Okay.
We also need to talk to member states about appropriate supplementary data and how that's going to be used before we can really finalize this. My recommendation would be to not assume anything yet. If your data, your local data, you think you're excluded, don't be 100% sure. You probably are, unless you've really you've looked at the your urban centers and urban clusters, and you've looked at the Copernicus data and you're way above this, then you probably are excluded. But otherwise, we want to sit down with member states and talk about it and work out how this is exactly going to work. One of the issues which we've come across is that if you use appropriate supplementary data and it's more accurate, and then you might get a lower green space and tree canopy cover numbers, which would mean you're then not excluded. And it might be, you might say, oh, that's a bit annoying because I want to use this more accurate data, but I also want to be excluded. And so we need to work out from member states how we manage that. I think the real question is for those cities that are likely to be excluded, are you actually going to be losing a lot of green space and tree canopy cover between now and 2030 anyway? I mean, that's another question. Okay. So this area, I can't give definitive position on it. We're still really talking with member states about it, especially as what is appropriate supplementary data. At the moment, we really haven't totally finalized what we need to discuss with member states, what's in, what's out.
And that's something that we will touch upon a bit more in a second. So we're going to talk a bit about this supplementary data. We're going to look at the example from Brussels Capital Region with Anne Franklin. First of all, I just want to touch upon any questions related to the definitions. So Leon, are there any questions specifically still related? Yeah, and Ben, yeah.
I have a question. There's a question on the exclusions, which is very important. It's about aggregated areas and exclusions. You aggregate first, and then you calculate the exclusion. That is the way the regulation is written.
Okay.
However, what we're not going to allow is for member states to game the system. That doesn't work. So you can't just have two LAUs next to each other that have no relation to each other administratively at all, and you decide to lump them together, call them a single aggregated unit, and then that gets an exemption because the total is like that. Doesn't work, because that was not at all why this rule was put into the thing. So if we find that member states are proposing these very odd aggregated systems, then we won't allow that. We'll take them. Yeah, that's not okay. Right.
We've got to be within the spirit of the law. Yeah.
Well, it's written in the whereas. It's also in all the. It was in the council minutes of why that was introduced. So you actually, when you go to a legal interpretation of a regulation, they look at what it's supposed to mean, and you can't just completely otherwise we'll change the law in 2030, or you review it, but no, that would be totally unacceptable. Okay. And it's not why the member states drafted this. So
okay, I think that's clear. Thanks Ben. Are there any further questions right now, specifically on the definition used for LAU, used for urban centre, urban cluster? Leon, can we see anything that's still remaining in the chat box before we move on to this question around kind of supplementary data? I think there'll be more questions, of course, coming after this presentation from Anne.
Yeah, I think Ben has done a great job replying faster than ChatGPT. Most of the questions, it's been amazing and really helpful. There are a couple of questions I think it's worth taking, one for each speaker so far. The first one I think is mostly for Ben. The spirit of the law is to restore urban nature. The spirit of the indicators, however, is to green urban centers, focusing more on climate mitigation. So there is a feeling that there are two spirits here.
Yeah.
Are you actually restoring nature, or you're just greening?
Yeah, I can definitely answer that. I mean, I think the nature restoration targets are a blunt instrument, but they're the aim of them is to help to green urban development. It's to get the measuring of green space going. It's to get the measuring of tree canopy cover going. This is not everything. You know, obviously there's all sorts of amazing benefits that can come from improving the quality of your nature. We're going to talk in future meeting, hopefully, and Heather's been really driving this conversation and discussion as well, about satisfactory levels and what is a satisfactory level. And in my view, if you have very high quality green space, the level may be lower than if you have low quality green space. I mean, you could have a plantation of forest outside the city boundary. That's not satisfactory for the city because it's not providing any of those useful services. Or you could have a smaller area but a fantastic mixed, diverse, you know, spread of trees and green space across your city, and that is very, very satisfactory. So hopefully we can bring in the discussion of satisfactory levels with our guidance in the future and really start to push and drive this idea of quality as well. But for now, to have a regulation that says no net loss and says that we should have an increasing trend, I still think is a really, really positive thing, even if its implementation is, yeah, it's not ideal in every respect.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ben. And one more question before we move to the next speaker is that it's for Grazia. For the canopy cover, how should we use the tree cover density data? From which threshold do we compute the pixels? If you see this question in the chat.
Yes, I saw the question. You do not have to find the threshold. The computation is very simple. It's a zonal statistic, and in this case, you take the average, and the average represents the percentage. In addition to that, it will be available an explanatory note that has been prepared at the Joint Research Center together with DG Environment, and this will explain the basic procedures also in general for GIS. Of course, I say in general because there are many softwares. Each software has a different name for the type of tool, but basically there are few basic steps that you have to follow. In this case, you do not exclude any data, don't use any threshold, you simply do a zonal statistic. And for the urban green, the correct methodology is tabulate area because you have to measure the extent of something.
Great, thank you, Grazia. Heather, back to you.
Great, thanks, Leon. Okay, so we're going to go now to the local context with an example from Brussels Capital Region. So, Anne, I'll invite you to take control of the PowerPoint. And I say welcome to Anne Franklin from the Brussels Institute of Statistics and Analysis at Perspective Brussels. So Anne's going to share some insights into some of the data-related challenges when it comes to the implementation of Article 8, these urban nature restoration targets. Please do continue to write down your questions in the chat box, and we'll see some of these questions after the presentation. So over to you, Anne.
Yes, thank you, Heather, and hello, everybody. So I am Anne Franklin. I'm an environmental statistician working for the Brussels Statistics Institute. So I will be presenting the process we have been going through in Brussels. Until now, it's by far not a process that's finalized, so it's kind of an ongoing process. By any means, I haven't been working alone. We have been working actually several institutions together. So the Statistics Institute, but also the Environmental Agency in Brussels, so Brussels Environment, and also Perspective Brussels, which is the urban planning agency. And it has been very important, all these discussions together, because we have had to arrive to a common understanding of Article 8, and this has not, it's not simple. So here is an outline of my presentation. So I will start by a bit of context, and then I will go to 5 data challenges that we have been undergoing and addressing, and then a small conclusion. So in terms of context, why did we start so early looking at the implementation of Article 8 and how we could implement it in Brussels? Well, we have been busy lately with the update of 2 very important plans for Brussels. And the first one is the Regional Land Use Plan, and it's a legally binding plan which actually determines what you can do where in the city. So where can you put housing, where you can put infrastructure, where you can put industry or urban green spaces. So it's a very important plan because, as I said, it's legally binding. At the same time, we are currently busy updating the Brussels Nature Plan, also to integrate, of course, what now the Nature Restoration Regulation asks. So it's very important that people working on these 2 plans talk to each other, and they have been doing that for many months now, and so that we have really a common understanding on what to do and what to expect. So our first challenge was really to understand Article 8. So if you have difficulties in understanding, where you're not alone, we have been talking a lot really to try to see what it means really. And so to do so, we have been decomposing it in little bits and pieces, really to see what exactly each sentence would imply. So this is actually the slide here. It's kind of a decision tree, just showing actually what we have to do now and what we have to do later and so on. I'm not going to go over it now, but you will be able to see it when you will receive the presentations. So our second challenge, and it has already been addressed earlier by Grazia, is to see on which area we are going to work on. So it's not a question of options yet, it's really about knowing the city itself we're going to work on. So as presented before, I'm not going to go much into details in this, but Brussels is an administrative region outlined in red, and it's composed of 19 local administrative units, which are all cities. So instead of working with 19 separate units, we'd rather work as one administrative region because our main nature policies and legislation are established at regional level. And so it gives more coherence to our actions if we work at regional level. And then in terms of process, we have been working on identifying which urban ecosystem area we wanted to work on. So as said, it's either option A or option B in Article 14 of the regulation. And so this again is showing the administrative boundary of Brussels in red. And inside, you can see the 19 LAUs all classified as cities. You can see that there are also LAUs classified as cities outside the boundary of Brussels. And if you take the Eurostat data and definition of a greater city, actually all these LAUs should be together. But of course, because we are a federal country, we will be working within the administrative boundaries of Brussels. And the other LAUs, which are cities or towns and suburbs, represented here, will actually be included into Flanders efforts for the nature regulation. So the other option, it was also shown by Grazia a little bit earlier, is actually to combine the maps about the urban centers and the urban clusters together to have the urban centers and clusters. And you can see that for Brussels, you have the pixels in blue in the map below. It's actually the urban ecosystem area as defined under option B. If you see for Brussels, well, we are a fairly circular city. It's it's densely populated everywhere. So actually choosing option A or B for us doesn't make very big differences. The urban ecosystem area is fairly similar. So for us, I would say it's not the biggest issue for implementing the Article 8. I've given examples of other cities in Belgium. As you can see, Antwerp and Kortrijk are located in Flanders, and Moucron is in Wallonia. And for such type of cities, of course, the discussion and the investigations are much, the stakes are much bigger. And so they will have to choose between the two options. So to identify the urban ecosystems area, well, for us, as I said, for Brussels, it's not such a big difference, but there are different parameters to consider if you want to select option A or B. As Grazia said, there is the ease of method, but you can also have to consider the degree of ambition, how far you want to go, and how ambitious you want to be to implement Article 8. But again, you also have to see if this is representative of the situation on the field. I mean, where are the areas that really need Article 8 implementation and would really benefit from it? And also you have to consider feasibility, because in some very densely built area, it might be more difficult. So that's the various parameters that could be considered in the process. So our fourth challenge was actually identifying the urban green spaces and urban tree cover. So we use the methodology as explained by Grazia as well. So we can see that we have to use the Copernicus data, but we can complement it with supplementary data provided by the member state. So here I'm showing one type of supplementary data. I'm just only going to focus on that one and not on other possible types of data. It's really here the map on the right shows the vegetation as gathered by Brussels Environment for the region of Brussels. And also we have been mapping a layer of water. And on the left, you have the data for Brussels as from using the Copernicus data from the CLC plus backbone. So as you can see, the maps look fairly similar. The type of data look fairly similar. In practice, how did we collect the local data for the vegetation map of Brussels? Well, it's not satellite data. It's data collected through airplane flights over Brussels. So we have airplanes flying over Brussels, usually every year at the end of summer. They're taking pictures of the Brussels capital region, and then they're assembled into orthophoto plans, either in true colors or infrared colors. And with the advantage of that it shows the vegetation quite well. So here the pictures show the densely populated area in the center of Brussels, as an example. So if we go back to the maps we have compiled, you can see that if we make a close-up to the center of Brussels, the Pentagon, which is really the very densely built area in the center of Brussels, you can see that there's still some differences. Is that the local data from using the airplane flights pictures, it's a bit more precise. We have a fine grain. It shows better the alignment of trees in the streets and also the vegetation present in the gardens. So I would say for the moment, the local data is a bit more precise, and it's also quite different, I say, in terms of calculation of areas here in the center. If you look at the southeast of Brussels, it's an area which is much more green. We have a very big urban forest there, the Ausonian forests, and then we have very green neighborhoods. And here the differences are not so visible, and also they don't take so much importance in the calculations because the areas are very green anyway. So we have been doing a similar exercise for the urban tree canopy cover. with on the left the Copernicus data from 2018, and then on the right the data from Brussels environment. Again, you see the maps look fairly similar in general. But when we look at the center of Brussels, again, you have the data is a bit more detailed for the local data, and have a better representation of the alignments of trees in the street and the trees present in the garden. If you go to the southeast of Brussels, in terms of cover, it's basically the same. The Copernicus data and the Brussels data really are similar. But in terms of methodology, they're quite different because for the Copernicus data, it's a tree cover density. So it's a percentage tree per pixel, while for the Brussels data, it's only presence or absence. So we don't have any idea of the percentage there. So which data to select? Well, we have to use the Copernicus data as a basis anyway, so that's the start of the reflection. But then we still have lots of questions on what is appropriate supplementary data. Here, I only showed you one type of supplementary data, but there are different types of data also possible. So as Ben probably will tell you later on, but I've already taken some of his elements from his slide. What type of data is appropriate? Well, it's a data that allow an increase in quality. It also has to be data that are consistent over time and space with a clearly described methodology. So these are very sound statistical principles. But then still there are some questions remaining. So how similar to the Copernicus data have to be, the local data have to be? Can it be quite different, but then, you know, really complementary? How can we combine it with the Copernicus data? And then is other data necessarily at the national level? That, for example, in Belgium, we are a federal country, so we have 3 different regions with different methodological approaches. Sometimes they can be quite convergent, but sometimes they can be different. So, of course, that's also a question. We have regional data for Brussels. And then our last challenge was actually working on the exemptions. And so as it has been said earlier in the presentation, even if we work on the option A, which is the administrative boundaries of our ecosystem area, for the exemptions, we have to work within the urban centers and urban clusters. So we still have to compile this map to be able to see whether areas can be exempted or not. And so we have been doing the exercise for Brussels. I'm not giving any numbers here because, as it has been said, the data is still preliminary. I mean, we will get more recent data later on, so the situation can change. But we have been looking at EU data and local data for Brussels as one region, and also for Brussels and as 19 separate LAUs. And as you can see, Brussels as a region does not quite meet the 45% share of the territory for urban green spaces, but we do meet the 10% share of the territory for the tree canopy cover. So this would mean that just for the EU using Copernicus data, Brussels would not be exempted from Article 8 and would have to implement it on the regional territory. But if we use the local data I showed you earlier on, because it's a bit more precise, we actually reach the 45% target, just barely, but we're just above it. So we could possibly be exempted as a region. Again, the data is, for the moment, it's rather, I would say, oldish data. So we would need to wait for more recent data to know whether this would be confirmed or actually there would be a change in this. And so for the 19 separate LAUs, using European data, 4 of the LAUs could be exempted, those close to the Sonian forest in the south there. And then if we use local data, actually more LAUs could be exempted. So we would rise to 10 LAUs. So you see, there are lots of questions remaining there. It's technical, but it's also, of course, very political to see the degree of ambition we want to have. So as a conclusion, what we can see that for us, I mean, implementing Article 8 is highly complex. So we have had lots of technical discussions on understanding the article itself, understanding the data, and the statistical concepts behind them. And then, of course, we have to do a lot of mapping. Of course, politically, it's also very complex because we have to define where we want to work on and the degree of ambition. And then, of course, in Belgium, we also have to talk to the other two Belgian regions because, well, we're not alone in there, and it's still a country. So there are some questions remaining. So when will be the final Copernicus datasets be available? So Ben talked about that. It will be important, of course, for us just to show, also to help us take decisions on how we want to work, even though we can also, of course, already discuss things on the data already available now. And then there are questions remaining. So how to use the supplementary local data? Of course, I only showed you one type of data, but there could be others. And then, of course, also there are questions remaining on the future calculations, what will happen after 2031. Just as an example, here is the text of Article 8 for the urban green spaces, which states that we have to have an increase in the areas, and we can do that through the integration into buildings and infrastructure. This is very sound and very useful for dense cities, but it's very difficult to translate that into statistical areas. So there are lots of questions, and guidance will be needed to help us do that. And of course, we have already addressed the question of the satisfactory level, and this also will require many discussions. And this is it. So thank you. This is the end of my presentation.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Anne. Really clear to look at the process that cities need to go through. And just to respond immediately to Albin's question in the chat box, I think this is a great presentation indeed to show this process that cities, in collaboration with member states, will need to go through to understand the use of either an LAU or urban centre urban cluster. First of all, for that exclusion principle. But using the LAU, the urban centre urban cluster, comparing it with the EU satellite data. So looking at EU satellite data and local level data for the LAU and a comparison, looking at EU satellite data and local level data for the urban centre urban cluster. As we've seen here in this example, it is different in terms of the data, and then seeing what implication that has. Are you excluded if you use supplementary data or not? And then further looking into the implication of whether you use both the LAU, the urban centre urban cluster, and the comparison then between EU and local level data. So many things indeed to look at. I'm going to ask Leon to have a look through some of the questions in a moment, but I just wanted to ask a quick clarification question, Anne, which was on the use of this Brussels environment data. You noted down that it was both for the EU satellite data, it was 2021 for the urban green space, and for Brussels environment, I think it was 2023.
No, it was 2021 as well. I showed a similar data at the same time because we have the data available for 2021. Now the question also will be for us, will we have the data available for later dates, because that's of course something we have also to solve. We can get the flight pictures for every year, but then it doesn't mean that we will analyze the data every year to have the vegetation. So that's questions we still need to settle and discuss within the Brussels Capital Region.
Can I ask for 2021 the resolution of the data? Do you know what the resolution was?
It was, I think, 1 meter by 1 meter, 10 meters by 10 meters, sorry, I think.
10 by 10. And Ben,
yes.
Can I ask you, Ben, what, because the new updated satellite data for green space and tree canopy cover from the Commission, the new data coming out in 2023, is that a similar resolution?
It's all 10 meter resolution, and it will be until 2030. So I mean, it's very important that you're comparing like with like for no net loss, obviously. That's the most important thing. Can I make a point about this local data before everyone runs
certainly.
off and gets excited about their local data and starts calculating their local data for the exemption? I think we need to split two things. Firstly, the reason that the appropriate supplementary data rule was brought in was actually related to no net loss on the definition. And it's appropriate supplementary data, so it's additional data. We are still absolutely in discussion with member states on how this appropriate supplementary data rules will be applied. So just don't assume anything. Don't go off and start measuring your local data, because I think, you know, for the exemption, really, we shouldn't be looking at the appropriate supplementary data. We should make a list of potential exemptions from the Copernicus data. I think if you're looking at appropriate supplementary data and comparing like with like from 2024 to 2030 for no net loss, that's absolutely fine. But if we end up having just this massive sort of Europe-wide attempt to get exempted by looking at millions of different data sets until you find one that says what you want, that was not the intention of this. And I think we might argue that we're using supplementary means that the total percentage for this exemption can't go down from Copernicus. I mean, we have not finalized this yet. It is going to be for member states to look at. And again, this rule was brought in because someone said, well, what if we plant some trees and they don't show up on the data? What if we've got some green roofs that didn't really show up? On average, Copernicus misses some things and it includes other things. So on average, it works out fine. In some member states, they've looked at their helicopter flyover data, and it comes up, they have a higher amount of green space and tree cover. So I think just don't get overexcited about this local data versus Copernicus data yet. It's for member states to manage. So it won't, although I know that, I mean, in the case of Brussels, they work extremely closely, and they are, in a way, an autonomous region. So it's slightly different in Belgium. But in other countries, because, I mean, Belgium, obviously, they have these 3 areas which are essentially making their own, like 3 independent countries, so sort of vaguely. In other member states, this is not going to be the case. So as a city, don't rush off and try and calculate this all yourself, because it may be that we just say, look, this is ridiculous. For the exemption, we're using the Copernicus data because that was absolutely the intention of the regulation. And for the no net loss and the satisfactory level, it's fine to use appropriate other data. But yeah,
that's clear. Yeah, that's really clear. Thanks, Ben. So exemption based on Copernicus data and the like and supplementary data needs to be like for like.
That's not that's what it may end up being like that. I wouldn't this is still open and under discussion.
But an ongoing discussion indeed. So I think the point of our
essentially, I will, the Commission legal service, and the Commission essentially can decide, how do we interpret this appropriate supplementary data such that it's in line with the regulation? And I feel that the best way to interpret this would be for the exemption not to allow, just because we don't want a situation where everyone's going out and just trying to get the exemption.
Yeah, of course, there needs to be some cohesiveness across the board, and it's clear indeed that this is an ongoing discussion. So this is also some of the things we'd like to raise in this chat now, is some of the points that should be considered around this discussion of using supplementary data. So really helpful to have this presentation to kick us off. So Leon, I'm going to come to you in 2 seconds. I think one of the first things we can cover is the question around seasonal change. So the satellite data, what happens when seasons change and if the land cover changes and is represented then in the satellite data. That may potentially have an impact in terms of the green space that is coming up on EU satellite data. How then, Ben, is this an instance then maybe where supplementary data could be used? How can we deal with this?
Sorry, I lost the. Just go back 10 seconds.
Sorry, yeah, just a question around kind of land use and a question of when the satellite data is taking the imaging. And this question of seasonal change. So with seasonal change, of course, something that is green space could potentially change over time across the seasons. And how that is then reflected in EU satellite data, that will have an impact in terms of the monitoring and reporting. How can we address this?
Grazia may know more than me on this, but I think for 2024 data, they definitely take, I mean, the Copernicus data for green space and tree cover, but definitely green space. I mean, I think it's based on multiple layers at different times of year, otherwise they wouldn't know if it was permanent or not. And so it's different times of year and presumably times of the appropriate times of day. But of course the thing is the data is gathered and you have this like zillions of pieces of raw data, and then it takes them quite a long time with sort of algorithms to analyze it and work out what's what. But they can get to quite accurately what different things are. Grazia, do you have a?
Yeah, what I have to add is if you go in the website where U-level data are stored, there is the full methodology, which is again very complex, and I'm not an expert on the methodology used by Copernicus Land Service, so you are free to go there and really go into the details. But I think what is important regarding supplementary data is that to be used, they have to guarantee consistency. In the methodology, they are gathered over time because they will be used also for the monitoring. So it's true that once in time, you can make a super precise map, but if in order to be used in this regulation, it has to be consistent over time, also for the monitoring. So I think this is an important point because we all are very good in making exercises with remote sensitive data at a super high resolution level. But here, the thing is a little bit more complex because of the monitoring needed.
I think this is a key point, is that the data used, if there's supplementary data, it needs to be consistently updated to be able to consistently monitor progress. Yeah, okay.
Otherwise, you cannot use one type of data set and a methodology in 2025 and a totally different thing, but very, very precise in 2035.
Yeah, okay. Key point for member states and cities to think of there. All right, Leon, I'm going to hand over to you for a couple of questions. Are there any questions in the chat box to raise?
No, we're running a little bit late, 10 minutes. I would suggest most of these questions could be answered on the chat. If Grazia, and you feel you have an answer, that would be great to have it in the chat. So we can take this 5 minutes break to have enough time for the next two speakers before we close.
Yeah, okay, fantastic, thank you. All right, then, indeed, if you have any more burning questions, pop them down in the chat box. When we come back after the break, we're going to look into a bit more of this question around the spirit of the law. So looking a bit more into how satellite data can be used to look at restoration. So we're here from two presenters on this question, focusing a bit more on the restoration question. But as Leon says, we're going to take about a 5-minute break. So we'll come back at 10 to 12. So 11:50. Okay, so we've got about 7 minutes to go stretch your legs, grab a coffee, and then we'll come back. We'll speak a bit more about this restoration question. All right, thank you very much. Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back. I'll just check that we have Liv and Meta with us. Thank you,
Yes,
Meta.
I'm here.
Hello. And Liv. Okay, great. There we go. Fantastic. Thank you, Liv. Okay, fantastic. So we're going to move to the second half then of our webinar. And here, as was mentioned before, we're going to delve a little bit further into how EU satellite data can be used to really focus in on this restoration question of urban green spaces. So I'll invite Liv to take control of the PowerPoint. And we're going to welcome Liv Toonen, Technology Project Lead at Space for Good. Space for Good is an organization of data scientists, remote sensing and GIS experts, software developers and urban planners, helping to tackle challenges with the aim of enhancing livelihoods and the environment. So we're going to hear from Liv today about how Space for Good's higher resolution of satellite imagery is supporting the Dutch government nature restoration efforts. And how it can go down to the level of tree species identification. So we'll take your questions in the chat box as we did before. We're going to go after the presentation from Liv. We're going to go straight to our next presenter, who is Meta, who will be talking to us a bit about the possibility of satellite data to map species habitat connectivity. So some really interesting presentations coming up. So for now, I'll hand over to you, Liv.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here. Indeed, working at Space for Good as a technical project lead, and we are a social enterprise working on environmental impact projects. And we are very specialized in kind of combining ground data, in situ data, scaling them up with satellite data with the use of AI, for example. So as was already mentioned, there were a lot of very interesting discussions already going on that I hope to also shed some light on from our perspective. But today, we'll focus more on using very high resolution EO data for vegetation monitoring in cities. And so that everybody is a little bit aware, I want to start with the basics. So what does an image of 10 meter by 10 meter resolution actually look like? Well, this is an image from Sentinel-2, where you can see, this is Amsterdam. You have to trust me on that. You can see the dam square, you can see some canals. And this is in the 10 meter resolution data that is available by the European Union. And if I would ask you now, please find the trees, it's pretty hard, right? Because you cannot really even see the difference between the canal or the trees. Luckily, as was already mentioned by Anne, if you show the near infrared bands of the satellite data, the vegetation lights up. So everything here in red is vegetation, but still how many trees there are, what type of trees there are, what is the health of these trees is very difficult to see from an image like this. So if we compare this with another satellite image with high resolution from Pleiades Neo, which is from Airbus, it's a completely different story. We can see literally the smallest trees next to the channels. We can see actually that this was what we saw before, are multiple different types of trees. And it's quite a big difference. So if you would compare these two, if you want to count trees, if you want to see the type of trees, you need a higher resolution than 10 meters as is seen here. On the left side, this is freely available from the EU. And on the right side, this is a commercial data set that is from Airbus, which is not freely available for everybody, and you have to buy this. And actually in the Netherlands, we have been very lucky because we have from the Netherlands Space Office, this has been made freely available, which gives a lot of opportunities. And I would like to dive a little bit deeper into that. So the Satellite Data Portal is a portal that has been funded by the Netherlands Space Office to support national scale monitoring. So their aim was to have a centralized access to high resolution data for all municipalities and provinces, but everybody in the Netherlands can use this. So that means that it's not only for vegetation monitoring in cities, but it can also be used for water quality, carbon assessment, tree types. Yeah, I mean, many more applications, even things about infrastructure. So actually what they did was pretty smart. Instead of that every application has to buy their own data, they bought it and they made it available for all the applications within the Netherlands. So yeah, we're extremely lucky to have that just freely available on our doorstep. And then we're even more lucky because we also have the actueel hoogtebestand, which is a digital elevation model. This is based on LiDAR. For everybody that doesn't know LiDAR, on the right bottom, you can see an image. LiDAR is a mostly airborne laser instrument that can even go through the canopy of trees and really show the structure of these trees. So with very high resolution, it can show the elevation of the trees, of the branches, and of the ground. And this is, of course, very valuable if you want to really map the structure of the trees. But originally it was not used for trees. It was actually, the idea behind it was that it's essential for water systems, especially in the Netherlands, of course, but now in more and more countries, water defense is very important, and it was previously used for that. So to measure water height and all those kind of things. But indeed, again, we can use it for many different applications. And again, it's a centralized data sets. And the previous data set that I mentioned with high resolution multispectral images, they are every few months updated. And this LiDAR data set is every few years updated. So this is not every year, but yeah, that's good to know. So how can we use this type of data? I'm going to give you an example of a project that we've done in the past in Amsterdam, together with Lucid Minds and UNL, is that it's called Retrievable, and Retrievable aimed to create a tree data and analytics platform that helps policymakers make data-driven decisions by providing insights into tree species, but also the distribution of the vegetation, the carbon sequestration in these trees, the canopy cover, but also the tree health. And this really supports in regreening, making the decision on regreening of cities, but also monitoring this over time and also seeing, where maybe trees have illnesses or those kind of topics. So what we've done, we've used these Earth observation data set, as I mentioned before, combined with local information, and then we trained AI models to kind of recognize a tree species, recognize the carbon in these trees. So how does it work? Just to give you a little bit of an idea. First, you always start with the data collection. So as I mentioned before, we use the AHN for LiDAR data, the high resolution images made available by NSO. And we use Amsterdam as a pilot case because they had also a very well described tree database. So we could use that to train our models on. And how it then works is, it's a little bit technical, but I would just try to make it as easy as possible, is that with the use of AHN, so with the use of this LiDAR data, we really map the canopy cover and the canopy height. From that, we can segment the different trees. So it's really a tree-based analysis. And then per tree, we calculated features. It's called features. These are kind of like characteristics of the tree. So it can be geometry, can be the reflection of a certain multispectral band, so a reflection of a certain light color. And these are all combined in one database. And then based on these features, we can predict, for example, the species, but we can also predict the carbon. So just for example, this is an example how this looks like. These are the features from LiDAR, and these different types of trees, they also have different types of geometry. They have different types of intensity of the LiDAR. So this is what you should think about. So then just going into the conclusions. The high resolution data sets and also this LiDAR are really essential for detailed monitoring of non-uniform areas. So what has been mentioned before, Copernicus can be indeed used for bigger regions. But if the moment that you really want to get into more detail and also really want to see other features of the trees than just the canopy cover, it is really useful to have high resolution data sets. And that's going to be in green spaces in municipalities or agroforestry systems as well, for example. Then the combination of using remote sensing and machine learning can scale in situ measurements. This means that we use the accuracy of in situ measurements to scale them up using remote sensing. And this makes the monitoring quite more affordable and also efficient. And I just want to note that we have seen so many positive things about having a centralized data set, and this enhances nationwide environmental and climate monitoring, and so it supports initiatives, for example, like urban greening. Also about the topic that came up before about, for example, consistency. This is data sets that are freely available, or not freely available, but they are available, and they are also quite every few months they are updated. So this is actually, if you want to look in a time series, these kind of data sets are very, very useful. So that's another way of looking at it, if having consistencies by providing actually higher resolution data for the country or for the municipalities. Yeah, that was it for me. If there's any questions, please let me know. Or if you want to reach out, you can also always email me at liv@spaceforgood.com.
That's really fantastic. Thank you so much, Liv, for that overview. It's really interesting to see the possibility of combined data sets and AI then, and training AI to map and monitor this health and different environmental aspects. We'll come into questions, as I said, afterwards. So I'm going to invite in Meta then. I'll invite you to take control of the PowerPoint. So we're going to move now to hear from Meta Pont, who is Professor of Urban Morphology and Urban Design at Chalmers University of Technology in Gothenburg. So Meta is going to share some of her work on the possibility of using satellite data to map species habitat connectivity and plan for protecting and restoring specific connecting green corridors according to habitat needs. So I'll hand over to you, Meta.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for inviting me. And before I sort of present you the results of using the land cover data set to actually sort of get an idea of habitat connectivity, more the qualitative side of the coin, let's say, that we have not discussed so much today. I want to fly you in with where I come from. So I'm an architect from origin and have been working as an urban designer and planning, and currently at Chalmers as a professor of urban design and urban morphology. And we came into looking into the green infrastructures from the perspective of densification of cities, which we all know sort of is on the sustainability agenda to actually decrease car usage, etc. But it comes with a backside. So I've been doing a lot of research, let's say, on densification and the impacts. And what you see then, that there are positive sides in terms of transport, in terms of economics, in terms of resource efficiency, etc. But there are negative parts which relate to ecology, social well-being, health. And these negative aspects often relate to green. So that's the reason, let's say, we as a research group moved or sort of integrated our studies in densification in cities to combine that with looking at urban greening and looking at those at sort of simultaneously all the time. So that's where I came in and started looking into, let's say, urban greening, green connectivity, just to give you an idea, let's say, what I'm doing in this sort of group and presenting as an architect. And we have been working in a way since 10 years now on two parallel, sort of based on two parallel fields and theories and data sets that you actually need to be able to talk about resilient and sustainable cities, including densification and urban greening. And one comes from what is called the field of space syntax, looking at walkability, etc. That's on the left side of this image. And the other side is landscape ecology, looking at these green infrastructures and what that does. And the whole point is what we are doing is that these two have to be, they all land in the same geography. So in the end, in cities, these come together, of course. And you could say that on the one side, we try to understand cities and how it sort of affects people in terms of social processes, economic processes. On the other side, we try to understand the urban environment from the perspective of ecological processes. And these influence each other in different ways, and I just give you a few examples. So for instance, the street infrastructures create actually barriers for habitat connectivity. So they are sort of, if we densify our cities, we add streets, we add things, then that actually impacts, without maybe removing green, it actually impacts habitat connectivity. So the qualitative aspects of these green areas. So that's one thing. Another example is the below one, number 3, is that if we increase the quality of the green areas, so we increase the biodiversity in green areas, that actually has a positive impact on human health and well-being. We know from a lot of other research. So these two worlds, let's say, they influence each other, and I suppose that the whole restoration plans that we are making are aiming to get at this. We want to improve, let's say, the quality of life in cities. So we have to handle the combination of the whole this whole package in a way. And in our team, we are trying to get at that in different projects. And one very simple example is when you just simply overlay. The map on the left is a map showing visibility of green, of tree canopy. The map in the middle is showing a map with the intensity of people walking the streets. So the more blue, the more people are walking that street. When you combine those, you can actually sort of define a tree planting priority map that picks the streets that have very low tree visibility, but very high levels of people walking those streets. So the biggest impact of the investment to plant the trees is in those highlighted green streets. So this is one way sort of how you can combine these two data sets. We have been working on. This is work of a PhD student of mine that finished 2 years ago. Then we have currently, and that's where I think I was asked to sort of give this short presentation, is that we recently in various research projects have developed a tool to sort of analyze habitat connectivity in urban areas especially. So this is a tool that is available. I put the links in the end of my presentation so you can actually start using it. And it builds on the land cover data sets that you have been discussing today extensively. And these are just two examples, but I will explain you what this habitat network analysis tool does, how it works. So it is based, as I said, on the land cover data. And in a way, what you do in this restoration law is that you just pick up a few of these land covers that you can count as green. What we do in the habitat network analysis tool is that we actually define through a parameter table which land cover type, which represents a biotope, is good for what purposes. So we use this qualitative element. Let's say, what type of green is it actually, and how important is that for certain species in cities to be able to navigate, etc. So this parameter table that you have to fill in, you use you define the level or the quality of that biotope for a certain purpose. You also define whether the biotope is a friction or sort of causes a barrier for the species to move through the city area. So for instance, a building or a street has a higher friction than a forest land cover. So you fill in these tables, and on top of that, which makes it very relevant for the urban context, you can add other data. We could call this complementary data. Let's say in my case would be that actually the streets are not a barrier in similar ways. Certain streets with high transport intensity, so a lot of cars, is a bigger barrier than a local street with very few cars. And so this you can add to this biotope map, and you can add other things. For instance, we use also the height of the buildings, etc., etc. And this is important actually if you want to understand how well the green can how well the green areas in cities are usable for different species. So whether it becomes a functioning ecosystem, yes or no. When you have this as an input data, the output data is as follows. You get a friction map, which is simply actually a map that you could say is showing the barriers in the urban landscape. That's the upper one. You also get a map that represents the quality of the habitat. So you just, instead of you only have the land cover, you get a qualitative, a quality map instead, using this parameter settings that you have filled in. And then the next one is that you get from this friction map, you get a map of potential dispersal, where you get a kind of a gradient of green area or general areas in the cities where you can expect certain species to be able to move from one area to another area. And when there is actually no color in this map that you see, it is kind of a desert, regarded as a desert for that specific species, sort of a no-go area. They will not move in, let's say, over these kind of areas. It's kind of hostile for them. And you can do this for many species at the same time, and you can overlay these on top of each other. Then there's a spooking sort of a map that wants to come back all the time. But based on this dispersal map and the quality map, you get these what we call functionality maps. And this is actually where you can start talking all these green areas that we have in cities and the other sort of the streets, the buildings that we have in cities. They create a certain functionality for certain species in cities, where you have a high value of functionality is where you have both a good quality of this green area and the high reachability from other green areas. So you kind of include the system perspective or the network perspective to your mapping efforts. And I would say, in a way, what you do now with this demand from the restoration law is that you actually can do all these types of analysis, I would say, easily. So if you do this on the fly, you can also do these types of analysis in your cities. And so this is the land cover data. You know this, I don't have to explain this. And these are examples then where we tested, there was a paper published where we tested different data sets that you can use. Again, this is what you have been discussing the whole morning. And the output can be quite different. So using the Korean data set or the local data of a country, in this case Sweden, you see these three maps that I show. They use this whole methodology, and this is one of these output maps using different input data sets. And you see that there are quite big differences. So this is, again, of course, important also for the question I address here. And the same goes for the functionality map that you can make. And this is an interesting slide, I think, in terms of the restoration plans that we have been discussing, because if you have these quality maps and the dispersal map, you can also identify a map with potential, the highest potential for restoration. And that's the middle map that you see here. And so you know where actually, if you want to increase your green areas, where is it most wisely to do it to increase the the connectivity for the specific species that you are looking for. Or if you have several species, it's a combination. So where should you plant your trees? Which park should you be added to have the biggest impact? Of course, let's say, so this is an interesting map sort of from a planning perspective. It's like the one that I showed you in the beginning with the tree priority plan. This is kind of where should you prioritize to add green areas in your city. So this is kind of an example what you could do on top of, let's say that you're mapping the quantity of the green, how you can use this more qualitative approach to be able to say what this green actually is doing in terms of increasing biodiversity in cities. And I could have given the same presentation from the human perspective, creating accessibility to green areas, but I don't do that because we don't have time for that today. Here you find the technical details of this habitat network analysis tool that you can download from GitHub. And there is documentation, etc. And a paper that has been published, also providing insight in how you can use it. And that was it. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so very much, Mette. Really fantastic overview, both of these presentations, in terms of the possibilities of the use of satellite data to get into this question of really looking at restoration and looking at ecological value. There will be some questions, I'm sure, in the chat box. There were a couple of things I wanted to clarify. So Mette, starting with you, on this, so you presented this habitat tool. It's EU data plus the parameters completed, which then produces this habitat quality map and this friction kind of map. And then out of this, we get the kind of dispersal map.
Mm.
Could we supplement or change that EU satellite data with local level data?
Yes, I mean, the input data that you choose is, let's say, is up to you. So you can use a local data set, and you can also enrich, so to speak, the land cover data from on the EU level with data that you know is important or you have, let's say, and then you can add it
Fantastic.
to the pixel data that you have from the EU level.
Oh, that's fantastic. And a question around this parameter table. So maybe I'll just take control and I'll just take us back to, let me take us back to that parameter table.
Yeah, you went too far.
I've gone way too far.
Yeah.
Where is the parameter table?
I mean, I have a bigger one. You cannot see it. Let's say there are 3 things that you have to fill in that one. So you specify actually in a simple, I mean, we could put it very simple. What you specify there is that you say that this certain type of land cover has a certain value for the species that you are looking into. And you have to put a value there. And of course, you have to have some knowledge about, let's say, let's say it has to be an ecologist with knowledge on the topic that can fill in this table. But for, right. I mean, you can do this for many species, and actually this data, this parameter settings can be filled in like once, and then you can reuse it in a way in all your cities and in all your, because these species have specific needs. So yeah. they don't change, let's say, from cities to city. So this can be done actually for a whole country at the same time.
Yeah, very interesting. We have a question coming from Maria, also around the data that was used. So the data, actually the monitoring data of where people walk. So you showed before also this pedestrian density map.
Yeah.
Is that coming from mobile phone data, counters, something else? Where was that data coming from? Do you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think that specific data came from Strada. But actually what we have been doing many years, let's say in my research group, is that we we count people in various ways. So we have sensors outside, let's say, that count people, and then we use that to train our models, like the earlier presentation showed, let's say, how you can train the models using actually physical parameters, indexes like street centrality, density, that can help to predict pedestrian movement. So you can also make these estimations of pedestrian movement patterns for your whole city based on those trained models. Because we don't have, let's say, we don't have data on people walking the streets covering whole cities. We have it more for let's say for cars, but we actually don't have it for people. So this is, but you can train models with a smaller set of in situ sensors that you have, and then you can scale up.
Okay, fantastic. I was going to say, indeed, for noise, I mean, we have the modeling in terms of the volume of cars, volume of traffic. So indeed, for noise pollution, this sort of thing, in terms of the and also in terms of the vehicles, the friction barrier there for the vehicles, indeed, that cities have that data, right? Okay, that's really interesting. Maybe a question actually to the participants, if you can write down in the chat box. So Liv's presentation on the use of this satellite data trained along with the Earth observation, so the EU satellite data, plus combined then with local level data. And then used with AI, which has been trained specifically to, for example, identify specific tree species and to identify, based on canopy cover, I guess, the health of that tree species. Are there any cities or indeed member states here who know of their city or country are using something similar outside of the Netherlands? Maybe you can just put down yes or no in the chat box. And then Liv, maybe you can just explain a little bit more about this, how the AI identifies tree species health. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so there are many ways of doing that. One of the ways is, for example, tracking. So often it's a time series analysis. So we track over time how it's going. So, for example, for certain trees, we have certain expectations of how it would grow, and if it's different from that growth function, that could indicate there's something wrong with the health. The same counts for example, the greenness of the plant. So in this multispectral data, there's a lot of different bands, and certain bands show really good kind of small adjustments in the greenness can also indicate that there is some health problems. Another really easy way of doing it is, for example, indeed in moments we've spoken about seasonal changes in this webinar as well. And if you see, for example, that there is in a moment that it should be blooming or it should be green, it's not green. It of course shows that also the tree is is either dead or not blooming anymore. So that can also indicate health. So there are a few ways of looking at that, mostly over time monitoring of these vegetation indices. Yeah, and then the good thing is that then this is like an automated detection. So then you also know where to go in the city and where, like, it kind of supports in the planning and in the maintenance of these green spaces.
Really fantastic, thank you. And then I mean, both for these examples from Meta and from Liv's side, and Liv, maybe a question to you around, we heard before around the use of still questions, of course, around the use of supplementary data for satellite data. But the key point Grazia made before was a need for consistency. So a need for data sets to be continuously updated with kind of on a regular basis with the latest information and details to be able to be used then in, for example, in this regulation with the nature restoration law. From your side, Liv, then with working with the Dutch government on this, I guess if you're just using satellite data, that's of course regularly updated. But then in terms of the local level data, I suppose are they providing regularly updated data, or is this something that's just kind of a one-off that's been done at the moment?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So when we are speaking about really local data, is really the data that is measured inside the cities, and often, like for example, to train a machine learning model, it's important to have the features of a certain tree, for example, to recognize that tree. But you don't have to have every year a new update of these data sets. The most important thing is that these satellite data sets that are made available by the Dutch government, for example, they are regularly updated, so every few months. And also the LiDAR data is, well, every few years available. But indeed, those are still kind of the LiDAR every few years, then you don't have a yearly update on that, for example. So that there are still limitations in the data sets.
Okay, indeed. Work to be done still. Okay, we're coming towards the end of the webinar. So I'm going to hand over to Leon to provide us with some final kind of thoughts. What do you think of the discussion we've had today, Leon? What are some of the key kind of takeaways?
Yeah, thanks, Heather. The conversation has been so rich, it's difficult to come up with insights. But what I'd like to point out is that we have had a very good, very high participation over 200 people, which is indicative of the interest and how we implement the nature restoration regulation. And these people came from across Europe, and it included national government, regional, local governments, which is great to see. Which also brings me to another point, that the next webinar on the 9th of April will be specifically on the collaboration for the implementation of the nature restoration regulation. So how do cities, national governments, regions work together? So stay tuned. There will be an announcement and advertisement of the next webinar. We've heard about different techniques to measure tree canopy and green cover. What is the right scale of application, as well as how we can use supplementary data. There has been an intense discussion also in the chat on this topic, but also how we can use high-resolution data to do some more advanced applications. That's something we covered after the break with Liv's presentation. In particular, how national governments can perhaps provide this data to have more uniform assessments. And then finally, I think we had a very interesting conversation and presentation from Meta, identifying habitat connectivity, how you can strengthen habitat connectivity. This is something that was also discussed in the chat. How can this urban nature, this restoration law be really about urban nature and not just greening, which some people might feel that there is this kind of lack of focus on biodiversity and the quality aspects of greening. So another conclusion is that we also need very multidisciplinary teams in order to achieve this restoration. I think that's it. I think it would be very interesting for participants to go through the slides. If the speakers are happy to receive emails, that would be also great. Yeah, over to you.
Okay. Brilliant, fantastic. Thanks, Leon. Good summary. Indeed, a final reminder, first of all, as Leon said, that we have the next webinar in the series coming up on the 9th of April. We're going to touch a bit more upon the collaboration between local, regional and national level. And we're going to look into the national restoration plans. So as Ben mentioned before, he touched upon this uniform standardized format of a national restoration plan, where all of the measures and actions need to be noted. We'll touch upon that. We'll look into what it is, and we'll have a conversation about how we can bring these levels of government together to support those urban ecosystem restoration targets. A reminder also that Grazia shared a very interesting webinar, which is coming up on the 11th of April. And this is a discussion around the EU satellite data. So the Land Monitoring Service themselves are doing carrying out a webinar to present and discuss the EU satellite data. We'll share these links in the follow-up. along with the link also to the Biodiversity Information Service website, which is where you can find all of the explanatory notes, the National Restoration Plan for the National Restoration Law. So it's the platform where all of the information coming from the Commission around the Nature Restoration Law will be uploaded. So we'll share these links along with the recording and the PowerPoints to all the participants here, and it will be available on the EUI website as well. So finally, I just want to thank our speakers. So thank you to Ben, to Grazia, to Anne, to Liv, and to Meta for your really fantastic and inspiring presentations. And thank you also to Harris, who's been doing all the technical support behind the scenes, and to Leon, of course, for looking at the chat box and for your concluding thoughts. So we'll wrap up. Have a lovely day. We'll see you soon.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
That was really good. Really well done.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.